Welcome, y'all. Howdy. Welcome to Texas Talking, the podcast that is all about Texas. I'm your host, Teresa Holbrook O'Dowd. Welcome to episode 2. You know, as a native Texan, I wanted to bring you a podcast about Texas. In each episode, I will bring you stories, facts, and interviews about the history, culture, legend, mystique that is Texas. While Texas is known for its hot weather, barbecue, cowboy boots, and large size, what else do you know about Texas? Well, if you're a Texan at heart, or just a curious bypasser who would like to know more about the Lone Star State, then you're in the right place. No topic is off limits, as this podcast will explore everything from Texas-style cuisine, places to visit, historical sites and figures, as well as topics suggested by you, my audience. So please subscribe to the podcast at Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, or visit our Facebook page, or go to the Texas Talkin website. That's Texas, no space, TALKIN.com to find out more about the show. I do need your help and support to keep the show going. I hope that you will join us every 2 weeks for new episodes. Like us on Facebook, give us some 5-star reviews on Spotify, and support us at Patreon so that we can remain on air commercial free. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Texas Talking, and click Become a Patron. You can support us for as little as $1 each month. And I would like to thank our first patrons, Emma F., Richard H., and Thomas G. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. Now let's get on with the show. In this episode of Texas Talkin', we're going on a road trip to Austin, Texas, the state capital of Texas and home of the infamous Dirty 6th Street, also known as Old 6th Street or Party Street, where there's an around-the-clock party scene, especially on Mardi Gras and Halloween. Austin's 6th Street is at the epicenter of what made Austin the live music capital of the world. When you visit Austin, you're likely to discover there are 3 sections of 6th Street: West, East, and what most locals refer to as Old 6th Street or Dirty 6th Street. The section of 6th Street referred to as West 6th is the section that runs west of Congress Avenue. According to street signs, East 6th Street begins at Congress Avenue and runs east. But ask any local Austinite and they will tell you that the section of 6th Street that stretches from Congress Avenue to I-35 is known as Old 6th Street or Dirty 6th. Then East Street is anything east of I-35. Now, in this podcast, I'm going to refer to Old 6th Street as Dirty 6th Street, Old 6th Street, maybe even East 6th Street. So, just so we're clear. Dirty 6 has quite a reputation for its bars that offer dollar shots. So as you might imagine, if you're on 6th Street after midnight, there's plenty of people stumbling around who do not know how to hold their alcohol. So for those of us old enough to remember Jenna Bush, now Jenna Bush Hager, of the Today Show fame with Hoda and Jenna, she was once cited for alcohol possession as a minor on 6th Street back in April 2001. Yes, when she was a freshman at the University of Texas at Austin, and her father was the President of the United States, she and a friend were spotted drinking alcohol underage in a nightclub called Cheers, located on 6th Street. Maybe one of the most famous people to be spotted on 6th Street in recent years. Another infamous act that occurred on Dirty 6 happened in January 1999 at a punk club, the Bates Motel, when the band The Kiss-Offs were the last band to play of the night. As they finished up their set, the crowd grew agitated, and some in the crowd had planned to bust up the club on their way out. That's when lead singer of the Kiss-Off shouted out, "Hey, that guy's got an axe!" There's video of the event that still exists today on YouTube, which is weird when you consider that cell phone cameras were basically not a thing in 1999. Turns out this guy was not the only guy in the crowd with a weapon. Basically, the entire crowd was armed and ready to destroy the club following the show. There were throwers. The police eventually had to come in and break things up. But it's just par for the course at a club on Dirty 6th. The former club, located at 317 East 6th Street, the last time I visited Austin, is now the Blind Pig. Now, if you would like to see that video on YouTube, I'll put a link to the video in my show notes at texastalkin.com. Dirty 6th also has a reputation for reinventing itself. Some report that East 6th Street has been reinventing itself since the early 1890s. Before 6th Street was known as Dirty 6 or Old 6th Street, it was called Pecan Street. That was back in the day when Austin's naming convention for east-west running streets were to be named after trees, and their north and southbound streets were named after Texas rivers. Today, as you walk down the street, you will see several historical markers that detail the street's historic past. You can also see many gorgeous Victorian buildings that still stand today, although most of them are now filled with bars and music venues rather than barbershops, general stores, and the pharmacies of the late 1800s. In its early days as Pecan Street, 6th Street was unlike many other places in Austin, as it was the place of many firsts. Back in 1894, when Austin was a more segregated society, 6th Street was not. In fact, according to author Alan Childs, 6th Street has provided a level playing field for merchants and minorities since the days that it was known as tells of a street filled with money dynasties and little mom-and-pop places, with its multiracial nature woven into the fabric of the street. According to Childs, the oldest surviving building, the Kressel Building, built around 1860, tells the story of the street. It was named for Mathis Kressel, furniture maker, undertaker, and patriarch of one of Austin's great medical families. The building's historical citation reads, "This building housed various ethnic business owners, Black, Chinese, German, Jewish, and Lebanese." If you're looking for a place to stay overnight in Austin and want to be within walking distance of the historic 6th Street, then the Driscoll Hotel is the place for you. Don't worry, all of the rooms have been recently renovated, and with their high ceilings and majestic columns, you will think you're staying at a Texas castle. It is beautifully decorated with just the right balance of elegance and rustic, but do be aware of ghosts. In fact, you can book a ghost tour. Just visit austinghosts.com and you can find the Driscoll on their top 10 haunted sites in Austin. It is rumored that the hotel's namesake and first owner, Jesse Driscoll, still haunts the place. Jesse had to forfeit his ownership of the hotel shortly after its opening due to some financial problems. You see, Jesse was a bit of a gambler and drinker, and it is rumored that he blew all of his earnings from his successful cattle business on booze, women, and gambling. To this day, there are those who say Jesse returns to the Driscoll on a regular basis and can often be found in his favorite room, the one that overlooks 6th Street and Brazos Street, smoking a big cigar just like he still owns the place. But this is not the only ghost that haunts the Driscoll. There are at least 4 more. Another folk story surrounds a painting that can be found on the 5th floor of the Driscoll Hotel. The artwork is unnamed, but it is based on a painting by Charles Garland called Love Letter, and it's an unnerving piece brought to life by Richard King. It depicts a little girl holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a letter in the other. Ghost hunters claim that the painting depicts the 4-year-old daughter of U.S. Senator Temple Lee Houston, who died in a horrible accident at the hotel. The painting is said to be haunted, and anyone that walks by it will constantly feel the presence of something sinister, until, that is, they vacate the cursed building. If you would like to read more about the hauntings and ghosts at the Driscoll, see my show notes at texastalkin.com, and you will find a link to the fascinating stories that I just told you about, and even one that includes the famous Texas power couple Lady Bird Johnson and her husband LBJ, former President of the United States. If you're interested in more information about the history of Austin 6th Street, I would also recommend Image of American 6th Street by Alan Childs. I used this book for some of my research, and you can find this book at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. It comes with some amazing images that will help you visualize the history of 6th Street from its earliest days as Pecan Street in 1884 to visions of the future street with architectural renderings of 4 proposals for what 6th Street of the 21st century may look like. Beyond the history, Dirty 6th Street, which is sometimes referred to as East 6th, has a lot to offer besides ghost stories and alcohol. Walking down its semi-exposed cobbled street, you will find some of the weirdest and funkiest stores you can ever imagine. One of my favorite places to visit when I go to 6th Street is the lively comedy theater Esther's Follies. Open since 1977, it still attracts large audiences, and with its tall windows behind the stage, you can get a peek of some of the Follies' antics just walking down the street. But do beware, the Follies actors have long incorporated their sketches into the street antics. Want a fun, funky treat? You have to stop at Voodoo Donuts on Austin 6th Street. They have more than 50 different donuts, and some of them come in some interesting body part shapes. And they will also create unique donuts upon request. I will warn you, you might want to order those online. While they do deliver, you really need to stop in for a fresh treat after midnight. Yes, you can get donuts after midnight on 6th Street. While Voodoo is not a homemade Texas thing, I think it originated in Portland, Oregon. It is a fun place to stop, especially if you and your crew have just left a bar. But seriously, they do have some tasty donuts. Another spot for me on Dirty 6, and this one's not so weird or funky, but it's the Iron Cactus Mexican Restaurant and Margarita Bar. This is not just Mexican food. This is chef-prepared Mexican food. And with over 75 tequilas, a happy hour, and a rooftop patio, I can't think of a better way to spend a Friday evening than sipping a cold margarita while sitting on the rooftop of the Iron Cactus with some friends enjoying the warm Austin air. And if you're looking for music spots on 6th Street, there are plenty, but one not to miss is The Parish. Widely regarded as the best indoor live music venue in Austin, it offers the highest quality production for artists and private parties. The Parish is not so large. It has a capacity of about 450, which makes it the ideal spot for an intimate music experience. Fans have long enjoyed local Austin musicians, all the way up to music legends such as Pete Townsend, Slash, Perry Farrell, and Tom. One of the questions that I often get from friends that have never been to Austin or never been to 6th Street, I know that's hard to believe. They ask me, is 6th Street safe? You know, people do compare 6th Street to Bourbon Street in New Orleans. And my answer to this question is always, it's as safe as any other big town area You just need to know the facts. So there are a couple of tips, and I found these actually on tripsavvy.com, but these make sense to me. First, if you're not staying within walking distance, you need to think about how you're going to get to 6th Street. It's kind of hard to park downtown Austin, especially at night when 6th Street is lively. So one of the suggestions is to maybe get a lift downtown using like a taxi, an Uber, a Lyft. Second tip would be that you do need to be aware that like most large cities, Austin has a large population of homeless people, and they do often like to congregate downtown at night. Most of these folks are harmless and they're just simply down on their luck, so they're probably not going to bother you. But be aware, maybe kind of keep your distance, watch out for any erratic behavior, and keep in mind that the Austin police, some usually on horseback, are not too far away. Another tip is there are areas of downtown that you might want to avoid, especially at night. You may want to avoid the corner of Natchez and 7th Street. The Austin Resource Center for the Homeless is located at 500 East 7th Street, and that's just near the corner of Natchez. The final tip that Trip Savvy points out is you do need to be aware that 6th Street is a popular night spot for college students, especially on Halloween and Mardi Gras. So if you are going to be at 6th Street after, let's say, 2 p.m. at night, be aware that some of these youngsters are going to be falling out of the bars onto the streets. So just be aware, and it's always a good idea to maybe leave before 2 a.m. to avoid any of these intoxicated buffoon stampedes. I mentioned tripsavvy.com and another site that has some good tips about 6th Street if you want to look up places to eat, if you want to look up music venues, is the 6thstreet.com. And I'm going to put that web address in my show notes. So all of these resources will be available to you, as well as the script to this podcast at texastalkin.com. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Texas Talking. Join us again in 2 weeks for more stories, interviews, and legends from Texas. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find the show notes from this episode and how to become a texastalkin.com. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to my podcast. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram. Please support us on Patreon and subscribe to the Texas Talking YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.